Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. I am joined today in studio with a friend of mine, Patrick Flood from Tennessee as well, here to discuss a very interesting development, well post the COVID-19 focus, still continuing the illusion, but a very interesting story about Patrick here being fired after refusing to take an injection during all of this, and then deciding to push back, deciding to take them to court, and even more so deciding to represent himself. And then winning against an entire team of lawyers hired to defend a situation that seems to have the entire backing of the U.S. government. So I found this wildly fascinating, because I'm sure you all would. So I invited Patrick into studio today to discuss just how that went down and just to kind of enjoy a high five at how pushing back against the system, right? Yeah. So Patrick, how are you today? Thanks for joining.
Great to be here.
And keep this up here close to you a little bit. There you go.
All right.
So yeah, so let's start today with, the general, like where this started. I mean, how about we do this, since I tend to assume that everybody knows the story and all of it, but basically let's start with you're at your job and when this comes through, right? So where are we at? 2021?
Yeah.
Okay.
End of August, 2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go ahead. So start there. So what happened? They sent you an email and start from the beginning of the story.
So it was at the end of August. It was a Friday afternoon. I'm doing my job, and there was I kind of had a feeling like Biden's mandate was being talked about. It was getting implemented here and there, and I felt like it was probably a matter of time before it would come. But the date wasn't hard. So then this email came, and it said, "Here it is. You must comply by this date, and if not, you're fired." As such, so
I'm still blown away by that.
Yeah,
that it even happened.
Yeah. This is I remember it was a Friday afternoon. I got the email, and just like, obviously upsetting and very disappointed, and just like, this is nuts. And I took, in between still doing my job, I formulated a reply, absolutely refused with about any kind of hedging, just said, I will not do this at all. I'm not gonna get a shot. I'm not gonna take a test. I don't need to ask for an exemption. That's just how I felt. I knew that it was coming. And then when it did, I'm just like, no, it's not going to happen.
Right. I'm just bringing it up on the screen for them to see. I hereby refuse completely under any circumstances to comply with any of the following, and goes on to list all of this. And let's not forget, as we were talking about just before we started, that this was about not just the shot. Remember that it was this dynamic where you either had to take the shot, then verify that, which then essentially means you're on the hook for whatever they tell you need next, right? And I'm like refreshing myself with how the lunacy, or you had to take I had to take a test. What was it again? Twice a day, weekly, on
my own time and my own dime,
and your own time. Yeah. My God,
yeah.
Even that alone seems like, I remember working at a restaurant where if they had to make you wear something, they had to supply it. Like, because they can't make you pay for it. But now people lost their minds during all of this. Anyway, okay, so you got the email, you refused. So go ahead.
So that was by the end of the day, Friday, I sent my refusal saying, I'm not going to do any of this. This violates everything I can think of, the Constitution, my right to my medical privacy, the natural law, HIPAA, I was like, this violates everything I can imagine, the Constitution, all this stuff. So about 3.5 days later, so it would have been the following week. It was about, I remember, middle of the day, Thursday, my direct supervisor emailed me and said, Patrick, thank you for all your hard work during these unusual times. Your last day is tomorrow. Please bring your badge and your laptop and et cetera, your equipment back to the office tomorrow. That will be your last day. And that's pretty much it.
Well, I wanted to ask about what they claim was, but before we get further, you said it's because you said the word badge. Let people know what your job was, so they don't assume you're a police officer.
Okay, yeah, just like your door fob to get into the building. So it wasn't a badge per se, but so I was just doing tech support. I was a part of a technical support team. It was NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They have an office in Montlake in Seattle. I was a contractor, part of a team of guys, like a, help desk / sysadmin kind of, different group of guys. So that's what I did. So they wanted me to return my, just my door entry badge, my laptop and things like this.
So what was the stated reasoning? Was that because you refused the injection, or did they, because I've spoken with a lot of people where they kind of skirted that when it came to the actual firing.
So once I got the email from my boss saying, your last day is tomorrow, I then went to my contract. So that was my direct supervisor. And I knew that my employer was the contracting company. So I took that email and I said, can you please give me in writing or an email, whatever works for you, I'd like explicitly to say, why am I being terminated?
Right. Good.
So he said, your refusal dated last week, whatever. He said amounts to a voluntary resignation because because in the employee handbook, it just says there's language to the effect of you will observe the workplace, the policies of the workplace, pretty much saying
acting like this is like wearing the right shirt that day.
Just because the employer says that he just said it falls under that umbrella, and because I chose to violate that amounts to my resignation. And I said,
interesting.
I said, of course, I'm not resigning. I do not want my employment to end. I accept this decision only at your will, under duress, with all rights reserved. Just just as the question came up to you, I was like, I want you to make a record of it.
Right.
What is happening here and why?
Right.
And that's what he said. So he put it off on, I violated a policy that was in the employee handbook or whatever.
See, right out of the gate, and this is why you had success in your lawsuit, because you right in the very beginning, you already knew that they were, at the very least, you're suspicious that they might try to screw you in some way, right? So you're like, I want this in writing. I want you to state the purpose.
Certainly.
Most people don't do that. They don't realize until it's too late, right? So obviously, and I just take issue with that first point, like the idea that you can somehow just arbitrarily add, first of all, let alone a medical intervention, which is just unprecedented in this kind of sense. But anything that like you have to therefore act like this or do this or wear this thing, and then because they're changing this policy, it's not like you signed a document that acknowledged those changes, right? They just change it and then you have to be on the hook for it. And if you just don't want to, suddenly you're violating a policy that was never there. I mean, they know that's dishonest.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder what their legal departments would think we're thinking. Go ahead.
It's interesting that you hit on that so quick, because as I got down into all the legal, so when you have a lawsuit, you have to have a cause of action, right? You complain, you're saying, this is why I'm suing.
Right.
This is what law was broken, and this is that's my cause of action. That's the gist of my complaint. And what we came down to is, when you're fighting these type of cases, the two main ones that I had in the end were informed consent, which is funny that how they tried to defend that was, they said they did not have to observe informed consent because of the fact that they're not a medical practitioner. You know what I mean? Like,
sure as hell forcing it,
so like, because you're not a doctor, you can decide to inject me with something. That's how ridiculous their logic was. But the other main kind of legal part of it is just what you were getting at, is to enforce the policy, for them to say that you have to comply with this. It amounts to a unilateral modification of an employment agreement, right?
Nice.
So like you said, when I signed this employee handbook or whatever, I didn't say I give up all rights to undergo any medical procedure, right? But so those are the two things that we ended up focusing on.
That's awesome. That's important. And let's see, what's interesting is the way they try to play this, that because I guess the CDC recommends X, Y, and Z, that they can, but see, that would be if they were trying to act within the law, it would be that they would also then recommend to you, not like the idea that they then feel it's upon them to force this and then act like they're not the ones injecting, because you have to then go somewhere else to get it done. It's this weird limbo they've created, and clearly it's not working out for them, So I personally, and this is hypothesis and opinion, but I want your thoughts on this. I wonder why. We were kind of chatting about this before we started. Like, even in this sense, why would a company almost hurt itself and undermine its employees, which you were a good employee, you had a great record. Like, why would they do that? Do you think it's that they just believed that this was going to save the world, or what are your thoughts on all this?
When I think back to the time, and certainly Seattle in general, but particularly in this office that I worked with, as far as the COVID narrative and masking and sanitizer, I mean, they were nutso, especially the people that were kind of the decision makers in this office were just all the way on that side of the team. And I mean,
so political,
we can when you think back to those times, just how all rationality was gone, I mean, it's just they were not quite literally insane at sometimes dealing with this thing. So for me to go against it that hard at that time,
you embodied everything
was
that they
seen
hated.
as like, wow, this guy is crazy. I don't know, whatever. He's a crazy anti-vaxxer, yada yada. In that climate, it was so against what was going on, and I just think all rationality and really consideration of the law. And actually, they specifically stated that they ignored the law further down in the case. But I just feel like they didn't. It was just a product of the time, and then the culture where it was.
Well, I guess my point, the more pointed question was, if obviously they lost sense, touch with reality, I think. But do you think that it was I guess what I see more is two main things. There were people that were terrified, that just bought the propaganda that this was going to help and that we're all going to die if we don't. Then there were ones that were just like, do what you're told.
Yeah.
Right. Like, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what our party says is the right thing.
Yeah.
Those were the nurses that were like in like vitriol, like that they, like, for example, like where you have the opportunity to use somebody that is your father for a blood donor, even though that's always been like the ideal, they would refuse and make you take the blood from the blood bank. That's just vitriol, I think.
Yeah.
So I guess in your personal opinion, do you feel like it was more politics or more, you know, that it was that
More,
they believed they were scared and going to die? Not that it really matters. You already kind of answered.
No,
it,
I honestly, no, I think it was definitely the political, especially when you're talking about, this is a federal government agency, right? So if you,
oh, good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you step out of line, and these people that are career federal employees that have gotten up to some kind of a decision-making status, for them to push back, it was unthinkable. So I think it's very much, you know, the latter. That's politics. Yeah.
I think you're right. No more than you think about it, because even at that time, well, especially at that time, maybe there's influence from the kind of, you know, whether it's ESG kind of direction or the kind of idea that they don't want to be seen as this body of the government kind of bucking the system or the new direction, or, you know, just my personal thoughts. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, well, let's bring it back to, so now you've been officially fired, right? And so now they are, I guess at this point, acting like you're the bad guy. They got rid of you and you're the only problem. So how long did this go? Well, is there anything that happened in between the lawsuit and that's relevant?
Yeah, so I did, as a result of working with a few different groups in Seattle, the Seattle Truth Network, people that were, you know, kind of had some idea what was going on and pushing back in different regards. And through knowing some of those people, I got in contact with what is now the Washington Civil Rights Council, who was helping a lot of people facing helping some people keep their jobs. And then if you did get fired, trying to help people like me to hopefully take legal action. So when I was told that Thursday, you're fired, bring your stuff back, I told my contact, like, hey, this is it, that my last day is tomorrow. She said, oh, give him this. So it was like a memorandum of law. And essentially it was saying, these are all the laws you're breaking, state and federal, by doing, and it was like this, like a 2-page document saying, just so you know, it was a constructive notice. It was very much saying, I'm just going to let you know what you're doing here, what you're getting into by doing that. And the guy, my former employer, said, thank you for your considered response. Our position is unchanged. You know, please bring your stuff, you know, and interesting. And he told me, make sure you wear a mask when you bring your stuff in. Of
course. Science, right? Science.
which I did. But anyway, so that was just important in that couple of 48-hour span. Like I had a hope that there would be legal recourse, but I didn't know. But I wanted to, if I could cover those bases and then see how it played out. Yeah. But that was pretty important. Then I said, I'm letting you know these laws being broken. Right. Just, you know. So.
See, this is what I was talking about. These are the steps, whether conscious or not, of this being necessary in the later process that allowed you to successfully win your case. You know, you put them on notice. Like you're making it, no, I know, here's the law. I know, you know, and you've officially received this, right? So it's like, we're on the record that you acknowledge the law. Like that's, you know, I just don't think these people ever thought, whether they even knew they were breaking the law or not, that this is my mindset of like the political side of it. It's not really about fear. I don't think they ever thought this would come back around. And quite frankly, I don't think it truly has yet. Like you're the unique case.
They just figured, especially, you know, again, in the climate of what was happening, myself as a single pro se is representing yourself, just an amateur, non-legal professional, obviously. They just figure I'm going to go away. They figured they could just brush me off, but they figured wrong because I just stuck to it.
Right.
But one thing that's related to that, as we got into the discovery process, that's where you kind of ask each other questions, you ask for documents. Just one point that's relevant to that is, so my first questions were, please tell me everyone who was involved in the decision to terminate my employment. Okay, they list these people. Among these people, who was the person who had the final say, who made the final decision? They said it was this person. My third question is, among any of these discussions with these people, did anyone consider the law or the legality of terminating my employment? And their answer was no. That's it. No, they did. They just said no. Nope.
I mean, that's just kind of mind blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, they just gave it. It's like, there it is.
I'm willing to bet that there's some kind of a legal problem there if they were to have said yes. I don't know. Like, that's just interesting, though.
Maybe, but I just thought it was interesting. They were just so didn't think of it, didn't consider it.
Well, it's a brief deviation. You know, it's like the idea of informed consent in and of itself. I mean, it's amazing that these people thought that, or in any circumstance today, because I really do think this is broadened out, just emergency governance, that because you declare emergency, or, there's a speed bump coming, so let's ignore all traffic laws. It's like just any difference. Oh no, we have to just ignore the things that have been there. That informed consent just doesn't matter. Like that you don't need to know about, or I don't know, just expressing shock that these kind of things even happened. And that still to this day, mind you, for not forget, it's still happening. Colleges, schools, like people now almost beginning to increase again because people are paying attention elsewhere. It's very alarming. But so now you are at a point where you feel you have the tools necessary to basically bring this to a lawsuit, right? So go ahead and start that process. Cause I imagine there's at least some in there where, I don't think they ever expected this was going to, to your point, actually, financially, as well as just wherewithal, understanding. In many ways, people get pushed out of this where, financially, I think is usually the biggest issue, where people don't have the time and the money to put into go the whole 9 yards, So go ahead. So what was the beginning process to get this started?
So following the firing, so that was September, I still remember, September 3rd, 2021. After that, on the life side of things, I had my income was just abruptly gone.
Yeah, right.
So, and again, at this time in the world, I was like, it was just a crazy time. So I put I was in Seattle, put the majority of my stuff in storage. And for the most part, I was living out of my car and out of a tent for the better part of 2 months. I mean, I would go to an Airbnb and a hotel here and there, see other friends, but that was just like this kind of like nomad for a couple of months. And in that time, I was trying to build up, talking with WCRC, trying to see what my options were. Like, how do you file a lawsuit? What do you do? What is required? There's the whole process again.
I love that.
That's the, and they're helping
Don't do your own research, guys. Right? Don't do your own research.
So we ended up I sent an email to their lawyer saying, again, here's I would like severance pay. You fired me illegally. And again, it's like another step saying, okay, I would like you to give me some severance because what you did was illegal. It's wrong. If you do not at least entertain or have a discussion about this, I will proceed with legal action. So for a couple of weeks, I was emailing back and forth with this lawyer, and he almost hinted at the possibility of a settlement, just to make me go away. As we got into a discussion, he wanted me to give him legal authority, which essentially means like case law or precedent, which there was really none of which at the time.
Right.
And again, we're still in the climate of all the hysteria. So I didn't, and he kept hammering on that, give me legal authority. And he essentially wanted me to argue my case with him in the email. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. So that broke down. So from there, that was the beginning of 22. Then I go to, okay, now I'm going to file a lawsuit. So the first step doing that, in wrongful termination, you need to go to the EEOC to, as far as I understand, you have to go there because you have to get, it's called a notice of right to sue. You have to get that from them to then file a wrongful termination lawsuit. So I had to go through that. I had to get in their queue, wait to talk to a representative. And then a lot of what they deal with is like discrimination in different workplace kind of situations. This was like a novel kind of situation. And a lot of that, when I talked to some of the people in that administration, they're pretty much with the narrative, you know what I mean?
Right.
So, I talked about the possibility of they could theoretically help you with your case if they thought they wanted to, and this and that. But even if they were willing, it would have taken months. So I was like, please let me bypass that. Give me this document I need.
Even if willing to do what?
Go through if they were willing to take up my case, because I didn't.
But I thought that was mandatory.
No, the only thing that's mandatory is you have to talk. You have to like
make them aware of it.
You have to have a discussion saying this is what happened. I feel like I was wrongfully terminated for this, and then if they then say that they think the case has merit, or if they think the case is something that they want to involve themselves in, then you can have that discussion, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just so much red tape and bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Like it's just wild.
And then the lady I spoke to was like, well, even if someone, it may be 90 to 120 days before I could even get someone to look at this,
So what's the benefit of them being involved? Like, what's the?
They could potentially act as a mediator and negotiate a settlement or come to some kind of a resolution outside of a trial or any kind. They could
of course
theoretically be a neutral third party or whatever and help facilitate something.
It seems the whole system drives people into settlements and plea deals and
of course.
A lack of justice, right? Just a box. And usually because the threat over your head of just like the 100 years in prison, you're like, whoa, I don't want to risk that. So I'm going to go with, even though I'm innocent. It just kills me, you know? So it sounds like so this body you're talking about it's a governmental body though, right? So it doesn't seem like they would even be on your side, essentially.
Right. And the few representatives I've talked to, I definitely got that feeling.
Yeah.
Because actually the first one I talked to, and I kind of gave her a really brief synopsis, and I said, they didn't offer, they told me I had to take it, and then they said if I didn't, I had to, do a test. And she's like, well, that sounds like a reasonable accommodation to me. I'm like, okay, like,
we're done.
Yeah. I don't want to waste my time with you anymore. Like, let's just give me this document. So a few weeks later, that comes through. Then I can actually file the lawsuit. So I got that. You need to get your complaint, like I said, with all your causes of action, your summons, get their registered agent and serve them. You hire a process server. They take the document to whoever. Their registered agent is a person who is authorized and legally registered with to say, if someone's suing this person, there's a directory. It says this company, this is their agent. So I serve my lawsuit to this. They got it. They had 60 days to respond because they were technically, I was in Maryland at this time. This took place in Seattle. So they had 60 days to respond and they never did. And I was just wondering, they didn't respond at all. No, basically you need to say, you have to appear somewhere and say, I'm going to contest. You don't have to defend. You have to appear and say, I'm going to fight whatever this is. They never did that. And the whole time I'm thinking, I don't know what, I guess they just think it's a joke. They think I'm just going to go in. They don't care. They're not taking it seriously. I had no other way to think about what was happening. So at that point, my option was to pursue a default judgment. So if the defendant makes no appearance, doesn't contest anything, then the next step is hopefully I can take this to a judge and say, can you please make a ruling? Give me some damages because they never showed up. Right. So I started that process, which was, especially at this point early in the game, was really, really confusing as far as submitting the documents, formatting them. You need like one document's a declaration, you need a motion, you need an order, and all these. A judge signs this, and you format this, and all these. I'm not a lawyer, so all these processes are really tedious and really difficult to wade through.
Even the format you're talking about, right? As I understand it, like if things are even slightly out of line or formatted wrong, they just won't even accept it.
Exactly,
right?
and I did
crazy.
So I submitted a lot of this paperwork over and over and over and over, and it would go through maybe not I think it's like a clerk, whatever. And he would say, rejected, this is not correct, and I had at least 5 or 6 times where I submitted this and said, it's wrong. So it was incredibly frustrating and disheartening at this point. But I finally got that to the point where I did it, got it turned in well enough where the judge agreed to give me a default hearing. So once that came around, then in the email chain with the judge and the bailiff, I noticed some of the kind of the canned language they had that says, the defendant needs to be made aware of this hearing. They didn't respond ever, but they still need to be made aware. So I said, well, I have the only contact info I had. I had that one lawyer I talked to in the beginning of the year. I said, just so you know, this hearing is scheduled for this date. And then from a couple weeks later, then they jump on, and then they respond, and then now they're like, "Oh my goodness, now we're gonna fight this." So
of course, with no benefit, with no negative consequences for not responding, even though they're legally required to, right?
Well, it turns out so their story was, and apparently when I served that agent with that complaint, in the interval there, the ownership of the company changed or whatever. The email box that was being monitored that would have come from the agent to them was just missed. I don't know. Someone just didn't get somebody.
Why is that anybody else's responsibility but theirs? Right? You handed it over to their representative. He received it. Yeah. They messed up. Yeah. So it doesn't matter.
Then the email that was supposed to get received just fell into space and they didn't get it. God, I don't know.
I just don't even believe that, quite frankly.
So then I had to go. So then that was the subject of the default hearing saying, and then they were going to show up and say, like, essentially, no, don't give him a default. We need to go to trial.
Actually, yeah, right.
Yeah. So we get there and I have to say, I felt like the judge was, and this was over Zoom, we're doing a Zoom thing.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
even more difficult, actually, right?
Yeah.
God.
And it got to the point where, it's like their excuse was like, the dog ate my homework or my bad or whatever, that's essentially what they said. And the judge I felt she was fair. I didn't know to expect if the judge would be antagonistic or part of the cabal or who knows, but I felt she was very fair and sincere as best as I could tell. And she's like, well, Mr. Flood, this is not the best, obviously, excuse or kind of, defense against a default I've heard. But to be quite honest with you, if I were to approve this, They would appeal it. It would go to a higher court,
Yeah.
and they'd probably just overturn it, and you'd be back at square one. So it's like, quite honestly, I don't think it would serve you. You know,
That's
I
nice,
just think. So I took that as genuine. So anyway, the default was vacated, which means okay, now there's a new trial date. Now we start that process towards the trial. Then we get into all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, see, that's just so interesting, though. Like, I mean, I don't think I need to inform anybody how obviously slanted the system is towards people in power, people with financial influence. You know, it's just so frustrating because clearly, in any other circumstance, anywhere really, for an average person to just simply go, oh, well, I didn't even get it. Well, okay, well, that's, oops, sorry, I threw my pen at you. That's not, anybody's responsibility but yours. It's like saying, I've heard this a million times from people in my family that were cops. Oh, ignorance is no excuse for the law. Okay, fine. So why aren't they accountable? Because, it just clearly seems like, I mean, I don't know if the judge maybe they would have held him accountable if you hadn't have agreed to go that direction. Maybe there would have been a consequence, but frankly, I just don't believe it. I just think it's silly. And I think just like you said, they knew that most people would have either ran out of resources, energy, it just would have been like, you know what, fine. I mean, I'm willing to bet you they didn't think you'd even get past the document, the being able to serve, like all these things that people like, and myself included, have no idea about. I've never been involved in that ever. So I think I can only imagine how many cases that people thought they were starting or that they did start, and they just immediately realized like I'm out of my depth, and it just doesn't happen, And
I certainly had that feeling more than once during this, because it was a long process. I mean, it played out over 2 years because of that lapse when they didn't respond, and had to like chase that whole process and finally get it nailed down.
It's because you were relentless, man. And that's one of the most important things in this, that you just never gave up and you kept pushing and you kept going. So now we get to trial. Yeah. Right. So, okay. So this is a whole nother, I can even imagine.
So that's we were headed toward trial. So you get a schedule, like here are different dates where you can, start with, like I said, the discovery process, right? That's where you get to ask each other questions. And I asked for, like I said, those records of who made all the decisions. And they started to ask me, they asked me a bunch of questions about it. So one of my reasons when I refused was it's against my religious beliefs. I didn't specify that, but I just said, it was an outright refusal. They never offered any kind of exemption. That was never even discussed, but still they tried to get me to spell out, okay, what is your religion? Do you go to church? Who are your holy figures? What is your doctrine?
It's just
what is
insulting from the get-go.
Yeah. So they're trying to then qualify or they want to judge whatever
if you're religious enough.
Yeah, or if it
Really?
meets their definition of what they think could, even though a religious exemption was never discussed, because they had what I said, no real strong kind of logical argument. They had to like pick it whatever they could,
But even the religious thing itself, we should make clear, it's not like there was some kind of like metric where you have to be this much religious to be able to get it. That's never how that was designed. It was that I have this belief, and my belief makes that not it contradicts my beliefs. Period. They don't say, okay, what beliefs? That's the point. It was never about like only Christianity or only this. And it's just gross the way this thing has been contorted, and that's been something, that one part actually I saw far too many times during all this that really made me uncomfortable, where, oh, that's right, I interviewed a nurse, I'm blanking on her name off the top of my head, from a Christian hospital. So it was inside of a Christian complex, but they had their hospital. And so she was a Christian, not least of which because she was part of this church and worked there. And then she refused it. And she said her religious exemption, and they refused it on the grounds that she wasn't religious enough. That's a real thing. That not necessarily enough, but that she just didn't meet, like they didn't believe her.
Right.
And I'm just going like, God, well, you hired her and she was part of the church. Anyway, that's why I want to make that clear, that happens so many times, and it's just, it's revolting.
Yeah, even just the notion of I'm going to judge whether your spiritual beliefs is valid.
Right.
Get that.
Whether or not they're even religious.
Yeah,
like, what do you have? What right do you get off judging my dad's? Like, God, that's just
basically
wild.
After having a conversation with a friend who has some experience with this, I just said, part of my religious belief is that my body is my own, and no group of people or a policy written on a paper says that you can inject something into my body. Like that's just very primary. That's I don't need a government or an agency to give me an exemption or a stamp of approval. Like that's just not going to happen. So
most religions in the world, stand with that.
Yeah.
So go ahead. So religious exemption. I'm interested in this part. So what other questions do they ask you? And then I would like to know more about what you asked them in discovery.
Most of my, so they kept hammering, they tried to hammer on the religion thing and try to get me to qualify it. And there's one other, because they really didn't fight a lot against the basic question. So I was in, after we go through discovery, they gave me a deposition, right? So that's for them to sit there and ask me questions for 4 hours, right? So I had to go through, and it's part of, I think definitely it's part of sizing you up. They want to see, okay, how does this person present himself? Does he get agitated? Does he seem like he's a little loopy or whatever? You know, if we go to trial, how would this person maybe come off, and what kind of chances,
exploit that?
How many what chances might they have to present well again in a court? So that's part of the whole point of that. And so I was just, you know, the whole time just being, you know, I answered his question. He kept hammering on the religion thing, and I, you know, just kind of kept it pretty broad and just, you know. But he wouldn't let go of it. So we got through that. And then they wanted to go through a lot of my my job search history. Now, was that good enough? When I was fired, you know, I was they wanted to judge how many jobs I applied to, if my search was diligent and motivated. In fact, and one of their tactics they ended up using was they hired an expert witness, and this is some guy who his job is to work with these kind of things. So I had to send them about 60 or 70 online applications I did. You know, I'm searching for a job. And so anyway, they had this expert witness who wrote up this report and said, you know, Mr. Flood's qualifications in this field are quite impressive. I see no reason, essentially the conclusion of his document was, I see no reason why he wouldn't have gotten, or he should have gotten a job within 30 days. You know, that was his, and in order to portray some narrative of, like, to minimize their damages, essentially, right? They're like they're reaching for any straw they can. You know what I mean? They wanted to say that it's my fault that I didn't have a job for X amount of time because my job search wasn't adequate to what this guy's standards was.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, that part's clear. I guess the point is, in case I get it now, but that then might have an impact on what they might have to pay you, right? Because it had to do with your time not being employed. That's part of it. Okay, so it's what's interesting though is that's at a time when the world was having a problem getting employed, right? Yeah. It's just the world around, everyone's struggling.
Many employers were stipulating you had to have the vaccine, and they were openly stated it on many job descriptions that I went through. Right. So, and I said, and I responded to this report saying, okay, this guy is conjuring up a fantasy world in which he's retrospectively and hypothetically imagining this scenario where I should have had a job and blah, blah, blah. And this imaginary world requires that COVID doesn't exist and all the tension around it didn't exist and all this stuff. And so essentially, I just I replied to that. And I was if I did go to trial, I was kind of looking forward to questioning this guy. And just, you know, just let me question you about that, buddy. So anyway, that's just one of the tactics they tried to throw at me. And so this was over the course, the discovery and then the deposition was over the span of a couple months. And then how it came to the next step was in Washington, it is required for you to have some kind of a discussion. It's called like an alternate dispute resolution, whether it be a settlement or some kind of mediation or some kind of, whether or not you're sincere in doing that, it's something you have to check a box and do that.
To have a discussion about what you would do if you were going to plea out?
You have to have a discussion. Well, you have to have a discussion like, okay, can we come to a settlement instead of going to trial? Right? They
make you do that?
Yeah.
See, that's my point.
Even if it's not sincere, you have to do it.
I don't get that is because they're driving, in my opinion, you for everyone's interest but you into a settlement kind of a direction. I don't even see why that would be mandatory is quite ridiculous to me, or like that doesn't make any sense. I mean, go ahead. What do you think?
Well, I just think on the face, I guess they just say they want to you know, reduce the number of cases that go to court.
Right, exactly. I mean, but that's not about any. That's helping the court.
I know. But they're going to claim that that's going to, you know, it's better for everyone involved. Sure. And you're not going to clog up the system. I mean, that's their ostensible reasoning for it, you know.
But on the surface, though, I don't take that at face value. I don't think that even makes sense because what best interests the individual? Justice. That's what interests them. Not, and that's what that, you know, that is giving you maybe some of what you might have gotten in hopes that it betters the whole system. Right. This is the whole collective I mentality. I mean, we could make 100 analogies right now based on, you know, everyone get ejected, nobody does. I mean, it's the same kind of mindset to me. It bothers me, as you can tell.
And it does prevent, let's say it was me, or maybe let's say another person in the near future. It does prevent, like if I were to get on the record of winning a case in court with this subject, that would be, I mean, I'm happy I got a settlement, but that would be the next level, right? Then that would be a legal precedent, and I'm certain they don't want that like on the books. You know what I mean? So anything like that.
Exactly. That's the whole point, is then they don't have to, like, in public facing conversations, it's like, well, no, we're not guilty. We didn't claim fault or anything. Yeah. Then this whole thing is in the interest of maintaining the status quo. That's what I think.
Yep.
Yeah. That's terrible. Anyway. So go for it. Go ahead. Where you left off.
So then we, so I get an email from the other team saying, Mr. Flood, we are required to go through this process. We have a mediator we like to work with.
Thanks.
Yeah. Right. So it was an interesting sequence of events their offer. So they said, we have this person very experienced in this type of thing. We think it'd be great for him to mediate. And I said, well, I'd actually prefer a direct settlement. Right. And so in this email, I said, I would like to open the discussion this way. Here's what I want. This is why I have a strong case. This is the damages I want. This is how I back that up. This is my initial settlement, opening offer. And they said, well, we don't want to pursue that because we'd really like a third party to give more of the theories of liability and have a neutral discussion of liability and things like that. And so I said, well, and essentially the guy they sent me would have been $2,000 plus out of my pocket. Right. And at the time, I'm just like, well, I don't feel good about that. I quite honestly that, I don't have a lot of money. I don't want to drop 2,000 on this guy who's your handpicked, crony. Who knows who this person is, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And I said, I don't feel comfortable with that. And he said, they came back with, okay, how about if we go into mediation, and if you accept the decision at the end, we'll agree to pay for it. So then there's no right. So that was their next offer. And I said, well, that gives me pause as well, because if I go into it, then that's essentially pressuring me to take some kind of mediocre little agreement just to avoid the financial cost of coming out of my pocket with that money. So I said, I don't feel comfortable about that either. Then he said, essentially they came back
like a car dealership.
But yeah. But I won. So he said, okay, how about we'll pay for it either way? So it's like, okay,
good.
So they're going to pay for it. I get to go into it with a mediator, and I can take the deal at the end of the day, or I can walk away and pursue the trial. So it's like, well, I can't lose much there. Let's do that. And then at this time, I was definitely feeling the thought of having to go to trial. I mean, it was very stressful all the way through this, but the thought of like actually trying to train myself to be some kind of a semblance of a courtroom attorney within 2 or 3 months was daunting, to say the least, right? Because it was a tough road up to this point.
Yeah.
And so we're going into mediation, and I didn't know what to expect as far as, are they just going to offer me some little pittance and be like, again, this guy's going to go away, give him a little bit. And, I didn't know if they were just going to check the box and play the game,
right?
Or were they going to sincerely come with something that would be fairly respectful of a settlement kind of, trajectory or approach there. And it turns out that I think, and talking to the mediator too, once we got into the discussion, we essentially, so again, this is another Zoom meeting. And you never talk to the opposing side. The mediator goes in this room and goes back, which kind of, it's intended to minimize like hostilities or bad.
I just still have issue with the idea that this is somebody that they already know, and you just don't see what's going on, because typically in a mediation, at least I understand it. I think aren't you in the same room? Don't you just have the mediator that's in the same room and you still just act through him, or you actually?
No, I think even in physical, like real life, I think it's typically done where 2 separate rooms and the mediator bounces back and forth. I think it's mostly how it's done.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, different situations people may not mind, but I think generally you keep the 2 parties separate.
I mean, I get the logic in like hostilities and so on, but it's so, even to this point, it's just so clearly impossible, and it's stacked against you in every possible way, even just the idea of that, the amount, like the idea that it's like, no, how about you multi-billion-dollar company, you foot the $2,000 bill since you're the one disputing in the first place, It's just, people don't know their rights in all of this. And so many people would have been cowed away and scared at this point 1,000 different ways. And they know that,
and the whole time, their whole, and I told Scott this, like their lawyers, it's their job, but they try to intimidate, they talk down to you, they give you this pedantic legal jargon. the whole time they're trying to batter you down and wear you down and make you
Right.
quit. Essentially, like, and it's their job.
That's what they're getting paid for.
I realized, I'm like, okay, fair play. That I know what game is happening here. That's fine. But they certainly, that's obviously part of what they want to wear you down and just try and overwhelm you. And like I said, at the thought of going to trial was like, man, I really would rather not do that, quite honestly.
Right.
You know, and then there's a general statistic, I think like 95% of all lawsuits go to get settled before they go to court.
Exactly,
and then talking to the mediator, I think he said as far as employment and wrongful abuse kind, he's like, I think it's like 98% get settled before they actually go to a trial. You know what I mean?
Well, let's interestingly revisit the moment that, you know, right before the argument is, well, if we don't, we're clutter, we have too many cases and we're clogging everything up. Oh, do you? 5% and 2%? I doubt it, right? It seems like this is just beneficial for the pumping in and out kind of system, you know, which, by the way, does still end up benefiting people, right? But it's just the idea that, you know, in a situation where I think, and more so today than ever, increasingly they realize that they're in a very insecure financial and legal position, you know, that like if really taken to its fullest extent and you had $2 million to waste to try to fight them, that you would be able to win a hell of a lot more. You know what I mean? It's just like, they know this though. You know, it's like, so now we're at a point where they are in not just this COVID situation, but for the longest time, you know, like Wells Fargo is a great example where they get caught for crimes every Tuesday, it seems, but they just factor it in. They never get anything but big fines. So they make 20 billion a year or whatever. I'm just throwing a number out. So they earmark $1 billion every year, just in case. Cause that's the biggest fine anyone's ever got. 1 billion. And Trump was like, we got them. No, you didn't. They broke the law the next week, you know? And so that's what I think is they just kind of end up factoring this into a process, you know? Anyway, I've said enough of my piece on that. I hate him. Can you tell?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, but so how did it ultimately resolve? So now you're the mediation aspect, and did they end up offering something that you thought was
right? And so I tried to figure. I had my initial ask for this much damages, and then I said I tried to prepare myself with like, okay, where is my bottom number? Like where do I feel is like insultingly low, and then I'm not even going to entertain. So I had a ballpark in my head like where that would be. And then as we started the mediation, essentially we went back and forth. The first kind of talk is like, I say, I feel like my case is strong because of this. And then they gave me a few things, and they were, you know, one of them were like, well, Mr. Flood, you need to consider that. And again, they're using, you know, language like, this is not just a lottery ticket. You know, this is not a risk-free endeavor you're talking. If you go to court and you lose, especially if you don't represent well, they could essentially say I'm on the hook for their legal fees and all this stuff. So again, they're trying to
exactly.
And this again, and the other thing they mentioned is we'd like to remind you that we think, and they requested a trial by jury, and they think that we think makes sense to mention that we think it's a good chance in Seattle the jury pool would most part be on their side. I'm like, that's true. I think there's some truth in that. Yeah. So and my response to them was, well, if you think I've gotten this far and I'm going to quit, so if I were to go to court and lose, you can count on I'm going to appeal. I'm representing myself. There's no, I'm not, you know, I'm charging myself my energy and my stress, but it's if you think I'm going to drop off now, I'll, you know, think about the cost you're looking at by just continuing. Because like I said, there was 3 lawyers. One of them was like a very tenured experience, probably like $500 an hour. I mean, it was they had the younger guy kind of like working with me, but just to estimate what they would have spent, you know what I mean? They have to weigh that too.
Exactly.
You know? So
of course they do.
So so I threw that at them. So anyway, we go back and forth. They start at a certain number, and the mediator is like, you know, I think he's like, I've done a lot of these, and that's actually the amount. I think it's pretty good. He's like, I think that's pretty, because I thought they might or offer you some little joke of a number,
right? But
the number they start at was actually okay. You know, it wasn't what I wanted. So then essentially we go back and forth about 3 times. This number, I say, how about this number? They say this number. Boom, boom, boom. About 3 hours later, we got to a final offer, and you know, again, I weighed that. It was in, like I said, it was in the ballpark of the low number that I had prepared myself for. That says like, okay, I'm good. I'm satisfied with taking this, as opposed to putting myself through more of this and going through trial. So we got to that, and we we agreed to that, and that was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I got, yeah.
I love, well, and I know you're not allowed to get into the details, but I do.
The only thing I can't talk about is the amount. I can talk about anything else.
That's what I mean, though. But
Yeah.
I wanted to point out that in and of itself, that's very interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Why in the world it would be like, because I think it's just about minimizing the negative fallout to you to be like, look, I basically, as much as it's not like a win in a trial jury,
Mm-hmm.
you still won in the outcome, right? They had to give money, which, as we all know, whether or not they end up, having to be like, we lost or we admit fault.
Well, right.
Everyone averagely sees that as you winning, that they ultimately had to pay out, which means they're admitting some level of fault, right? And so,
well, in the 2 points I was going to say, in this settlement agreement, there's all these different clauses, but two of them says that this by no means acknowledges any law, anything was wrong or unlawful was done. And the next point was like, this does not acknowledge one party as victorious over the other. I'm like, well, yes, it does. I'm thinking, but that's what the document says. But
of course, that's them. Yeah. You write whatever you want. Like the point is that if they thought that if you were just some pushover with nothing, they would have been like, we're going to take you. They wouldn't have let it because they would think they would win. Mm-hmm. If they clearly had some indication they thought you might win, and so the juice worth the squeeze. So it's a win, right? Yeah. But so what's interesting is that they would go out of their way to make sure you wouldn't even be able to talk about the amount. I just find that very telling.
I think that's pretty standard.
Is it really?
Yeah, I think so.
That's interesting. Well, in any case, I think that the whole process is what I'm really speaking to as well. And that I do still think, and I'm very happy that one, you stuck it to them, that you took it this far and took all the time to do it. But I still want to reiterate the fact that I think that ultimately it is in the long run a win for the system to allowing this whole process, not in any way a negative thing to you. Like, I'm glad you did that. And I think you made the right move because they would have gone, millions of dollars, years of process, it would have been a whole thing. Mm-hmm. And maybe you'd win, but maybe again, it's not that out of realm of possibility that they could try to then, turn it in the process of the trial and make it look like you were being malicious about something and then dump, $1 million of costs on you. And then you're screwed even more, but I just think it's so frustrating that we are in a position where, when the whole process of justice is blind and all these things we tell ourselves, and the whole thing is leaning on you the whole time, the whole thing, that, you might even just that last point, So anyway, I'm really glad that it turned out that way because whether people watching or somebody you talk to, it shows them that there's a level of culpability that's still there. And that I think this is going to build even more. And I think that we're going to see the class actions and more of this come along. I think more so as we start to see more and more of the long-term negative effects that I think are building as we go forward. But, so any thoughts on that, go ahead. But where are you at right now with all this? Like, has anything changed for you? Are you going to find another job? Is it, you give me your final thoughts on all of it.
Well, I've since gotten another job and, very happy where I am now. Although one interesting little tidbit that I saw the other day. So again, I work with computers. This is one little side story that gave me a little, a little reaction. So I'm working on this person, in my office and working on the email program and the title, and this person's like, give or take one function of this person is kind of office manager. Mm-hmm. But the title, I just glanced at the title of the email was, and this is like a week or two ago, COVID testing / masks. And I'm just like, this chill came over my body. Like, do I have to go through this again? Yeah, I don't want to. I will, but I really don't want to. But that it just gave me a shiver. Like, please, I really don't even want to entertain this bullshit. Please,
Here's another reason why this is definitely a win, because in and of itself, it's a tool. I mean, like right now, you show your employer, look, man, I'm not effing around here. Yeah. Like I spent 3 years and they had to pay out. Yeah. So trust me, you're wrong. What I mean? Like, that's going to work.
Right.
I don't think it's going to happen the same way we saw before. I mean, not entirely. I think we're going to see at some level this kind of happen, but not like before. That's my opinion. I hope I'm right. But that ultimately, because there were consequences to this, whether it was financial, whether it was just like the way people perceive things. Businesses lost a lot of like what happened with Bud Light. I don't even know if that even came back around, but I know they were hurting for a minute after things like that. Different topic, but same kind of idea when companies lean into the narrative and what's supposed to happen. So I hope that this doesn't continue as bad as we saw it before, but I just hope people can take this as an insight into just the simple point for me is that if you believe you're right about something and the law is on your side, and morally you're correct, don't give up, don't stop, don't stand down. Some people don't have the ability to keep going, but it just shows you that even with the system slanted against us, that if you just stand with what's right, I do believe that the world, in a little bit of a kind of touchy-feely moment really does, speak to those kind of things. I believe that. And I think that's kind of an example of this right now, that I'm just kind of shocked at all the team of lawyers, the whole, how much they put behind it. It speaks to the fact that you were right and they know that. And I think the larger scale, they know that. And I think now they're trying to take actions to minimize more of that going forward. That'd be my take on it.
Yeah. Well, I hope, I think I can't imagine if they have the next phase, who knows if they're going to invent the next, whatever virus, blah, blah, blah. It seems like they're focusing on the World War III psyop at this point, so, but who knows, in a year, 2 or 3, who knows, there could be another rerun of, I hope not, but, if there is, then hopefully, my little, like you said, my little piece of justice, I put in years of this, of just kind of effort and grinding through this legal, it's not fun. And it's a time suck. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very grateful that I got, what I got. It would have been nice, to go farther, but anyway, I'm satisfied with the way it went, and it was a long, exhausting road. But yeah, anyone else out there, just know that obviously it can be done, it might not be ideal, and there's going to be, people, like you said, the game is kind of rigged against you, but it's still, you still can, and again, myself, and I'm sure you and a lot of people watching here, it's within my nature. I'm just not going to accept this shit. Like I knew when the requirement came around, I'm not entertaining that for a millisecond. That will not go in my body no matter what. Right. I knew that. And I knew that it's just within me that I'm going to fight this, because as far as I can tell, this is lawyers or whoever to this day would at this point try to argue that, looking back at COVID, that anyone that would argue it was okay or justified to coerce, compel, force people to take this injection for their job or for any other, anyone who would make that argument now is just either, I don't know, completely ignorant or just straight or evil or some mixture of the two. I don't know. Yeah. So I really felt like in kind of a, kind of like a woo-woo sense too, like when I was having difficult time fighting this, it's like, I really feel like this case and these lawyers, my feeling was like they're like the operational minions of evil. Like that's what I'm fighting. That's really what I felt like what I was doing. Like it's like people who would argue this at this point, how can you do that? It's just it's so despicable with what even like mainstream normie kind of people know is now common knowledge at this point, to argue that I should have been injected with that. It's really, it's crazy to think of that, So I just said, I'm gonna, as long as I can fight it. It was difficult, but I will. So yeah,
I think that everybody already knew. They knew then, they know now. My body, my choice wasn't just some little thing. The people that was there, right? It's just for whatever reason, the propaganda, the scare tactics, it hit a right moment. And quite frankly, I've always thought that the way that we were presented with, everybody thought, I still don't think that was the case. I don't think it today with what's going on now. I think that they're desperately losing clout and influence in every topic, as the media, as the government. And I think these things are falling quickly, like we saw very quickly. Like we used to take a decade for us to figure out what really happened. People are like weeks in going, you're lying, here's why, and it's not working. And I think that now this kind of stuff is helping people realize not just that we can all see it, but we can actually do something about it, And I think that's powerful. And I think one of the best notes to end on is, I love the fact that you really did, poke them in the eye. And I think that whether it was as much as it could have been or not, the point is they had to pay them a hell of a lot of money to do that. And then they had to pay you.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So that was a loss, no matter how they spin it. So whatever it is, you still kind of stuck it to them, stuck it to the man, stuck it to Pfizer, whatever it is, the company. I love it. And I think we need more of that, more relentless pursuit of what we think is right, and just sharing the information with other people. And I don't know if it's what you would want, but if you're interested, people want to reach out to you. I'm sure they would have questions, man, because the time you put in, the information you have, maybe that can be a new job going forward, helping people.
Well, yeah, and there are still people that are in this process. So the people I work with, Washington Civil Rights Council or WCRC US, if you have, even if you're not, and obviously a lot of people don't live in Washington, but even if you find yourself in a similar situation and you want to ask them questions, go on the website, email them, and they could at least give you a start. And there's still people that I check in with that are in different phases of this process. So hopefully there'll be some more victories of a similar, kind of group of people. And if anyone's going through it, just, look at, you do have options if you want to. I mean, if I can, so I'm trying to help anyone who can. Those other people that are in Washington working with. But if anybody has any questions, I think a good email address would be Winston Smith's Diary. It's a plural. That's just an email account I have. The podcast I need to get.
Funny, we all have old Gmails from when we were 15.
Well, that's
or whenever,
That's my podcast that I need to revive. I need to get that going again, but I still have the email address.
Right.
But if anybody has any questions, you can get in touch with Ryan or figure it out. But
and I'll put it in the show notes so you guys can check it out.
If I can help anybody, with just just my experience or encouragement, moral support, because you're going to need that to go through it. But it can be done. And if you're pro se, again, they can't just play the game of, we're going to drain you of funds or legal fees or whatever. So, you can, it's tough, but
it can be done.
Yeah, it can. Yeah.
That's the main point, man. Well, good on you for doing it, brother. And, giving people hope and all this. Anything else you want to, kind of leave that we might've missed, or important things that you want people to know, any other parts to include before we wrap today?
No, I think that's it. I'm just, just again, like I hope more people, and if there's one person out there who knows that they have this option, I hope there's a cascade of stories coming that are similar.
Me too.
And obviously I'm grateful to have, the victory I got. Yeah. And it's just good to know that, from the first day when I refused, just like you said, don't just sit down and take this shit. I mean, you have to, whatever avenue you have to push back,
take it.
Yeah. And if if it can be productive, you might not get a perfect victory, but it needs to be, needs to be pushed back no matter what. So,
well, and just to end in general, and I wholeheartedly agree, imagine 100,000 Patrick Floods, imagine 1 million people in the position of getting a little win, but all together, all at the same time, all with the same topic, or over a period of time. Like, that's a gigantic win, right? And so the point simply, again, it is possible, right? They are in every way, every single day, trying to convince you that you don't have the power, that you're powerless, that you should just sit back and accept your fate because they're doing everything to make it's not true. And I think people are very quickly beginning to realize that we are far more powerful than they want us to think, as Derek Bros always tries to point out to us. And I think it's an important time to not just notice, to realize, but to grasp that, right? To live it, to move forward in the idea that we can absolutely make a difference, whether one of us or a group of us, or just speaking our minds, right? So that's what we're all about. But thank you all for being here. Thank you, Patrick, for joining me today. And as always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.